Will China charge up to 25% extra on imported cars with big engines? What does this mean for the car market and global trade? A big trade group in China called the China Chamber of Commerce to the EU heard from insiders that this could happen. So they shared this news on X, a social media platform. If China does this, it will mostly affect car makers from Europe and the US. This move could seriously change how China interacts with the European Union and the US. China is threatening to hit back as the European Commission gets ready to finish its investigation into China's support for its growing electric car market. The EU has to tell Chinese exporters by June the 5th if it plans to add tariffs. Last week, China suggested it might put similar taxes on European wine and dairy products. In a newspaper interview published by the ruling Communist Party's Global Times on Tuesday, Liu Bin, a top expert at Chinese Automotive Technology and Research Center, suggested that the tariff rate on imported cars with engines larger than 2.5 litres should be temporarily increased. The China Chamber of Commerce to the EU mentioned this interview and highlighted the potential tariff changes. The World Trade Organization rules would let China set a tariff on imported cars up to 25%. Liu said this in a report, adding that China brought in 250,000 cars with engines larger than 2.5 litres in 2023. This made up about 32% of all imported cars. Daniel Koller from consultancy Intralink said the car makers most affected by this possible tariff would be Toyota, Mercedes-Benz and BMW. Japanese cars like Toyota's Lexus would only be affected if China placed tariffs on imports from all countries, not just those from the US or the EU. China's trade investigators and warners are not stopping with the EU, said analysts from Eurasia Group in a note on Tuesday. They added that Brussels wants to show Beijing that it will fight against Chinese subsidies and overproduction with its electric vehicle probe. Last year, China exported 1.55 million EVs. About 638,000 of these went to Europe, and around 52,000 were sent to North America, according to customs data. Earlier this month, the Biden administration announced 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. Meanwhile, the EU is investigating China's subsidies in various industries, causing Chinese companies to withdraw from rail and energy projects. Chinese electric vehicles are getting a lot of attention in the EU and US. This is because China controls most of the battery supply chain and makes more EVs than any other country. With the price war and slowing economy at home, Chinese car makers are selling more cars overseas. This has led to claims that China is exporting too many cars and concerns about the security of their tech-heavy vehicles. Earlier this month, President Xi Jinping visited Europe to try and stop the EU from taking the same steps as the US. The US has recently imposed many new charges on some imports from China, making Beijing worry that US allies might do the same. In an interview with Global Times, Li said that some countries and regions have put limits on the new energy vehicle sector, which goes against the idea of green development. He added that these actions will only hurt their own consumers. China is thinking about the increased tariffs on some car imports, according to a well-known business group. This move would respond to the EU and US trade actions against Chinese-made electric vehicles. On Tuesday evening, the China Chamber of Commerce to the EU shared that insiders informed them about China's possible plan to temporarily raise tariffs trades on imported cars with larger engines. This Brussels-based group is confirming a threat that was already reported by the Global Times, a Chinese state-owned newspaper. This possible action could affect Europe and US car makers, said the Chamber in a statement. This comes after Washington announced high tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles and Brussels started looking into Chinese EV subsidies. Trade relations between China and Western countries are getting worse, and things might deteriorate in the coming weeks. Last week, Washington raised tariffs on many Chinese goods, including EVs, batteries, semiconductors, cranes, graphite and other important minerals. The European Union is taking significant steps to address Chinese subsidies to various industries, claiming these subsidies are harming the European market. The most notable case in an investigation into subsidies in China's electric vehicle sector, which should be completed by June 6th. Professional tariffs are expected to be applied by early July. Beijing has shown it will not sit back quietly. On Sunday, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce announced an investigation into imports of polyoxymethylene copolymer, a chemical used in automotive engineering, from the US, EU, Japan and Taiwan. China has already started looking into claims of unfair pricing in the European brandy sector, which seems aimed at France's cognac exports. France has been a big supporter of tougher EU trade policies towards China. While the US and China have been in a trade war for years, some think the EU might soon have its own conflict with Beijing. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen tried to downplay the idea on Tuesday but confirmed that her tough policies would continue. Earlier that day, US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen encouraged Europe to impose high tariffs on Chinese trade tech goods, just like the US. However, von der Leyen downplayed the chances of this happening. She said, We share some of the concerns of our counterparts, but we have a different, more tailored approach. The US has imposed tariffs on lots of products, but we started an investigation into Chinese EVs about 8 months ago, following WTO rules, so the investigation is still happening. A few days ago, a controversy stirred up when former US President Donald Trump talked about imposing a 100% tariff on cars made in Mexico by Chinese companies and sold in America. He said there'd be big trouble in the American auto market if he did win the November election, though Trump's speech caused some disagreement, with some people thinking he meant there would be big trouble in the US if he wasn't elected. His comment showed a bigger worrying in the West about China's growing electric vehicle industry. China's EVs are cheaper, and they're becoming a big deal in the Western markets. Chinese electric vehicle makers are building lots of cars, and they have easier access to materials and batteries. Because of this, they can make EVs that are cheaper than the ones made in the West, and they can compete as well. Recently, US Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo said that Chinese EVs could one day be driving on American roads. She mentioned that if there were enough government controls on the software and sensors in these cars, they could be safe. In an interview with US media outlet MSNBC, she said, "Cars these days are like an iPhone on wheels. You connect your phone and you might receive a text message." The remark made by a Chinese official denied by her, saying the US is creating a false story. This shows how Washington often turns economic and trade matters into ones about politics and security. Chinese electric vehicles worry Western car makers, more because they're cheap, not because of security issues. Bloomberg recently reported that the low price of Chinese EVs have worried American automakers like Ford and GM. BYD's Seagull electric car, which costs less than $10,000, is making other car makers take notice. This is forcing Detroit, the heart of Americans' auto industry, to think about making cheaper cars. Even though BYD doesn't sell cars in the US, affordable Chinese EVs like the Seagull hatchback are showing a future threat to American automakers. One big thing about the car is its price tag of $9,698. That's a lot cheaper than the average American EV, which costs more than $50,000 according to Bloomberg. BYD, a company based in Shenzhen and backed by Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, became the world's largest electric vehicle producer in late 2023, surpassing Tesla. Chinese cars bought in the US have a 25% tariff, but those from Mexico made with Chinese parts only pay a 2.5 tariff due to the US-Mexico-Canada Trade Pact. Although BYD doesn't plan to sell cars in the US right away, it's thinking about building a factory in Mexico. In February, Tesla CEO Elon Musk warned investors during an earnings call that China's EV companies will crush their Western competitors if trade barriers aren't put up to limit their growth. This came after BYD became the world's top seller of electric cars, overtaking Tesla. The Chinese car companies are the most competitive car companies in the world, Musk said during a Tesla's Q4 earnings call. Chinese automakers are expanding globally by building more car factories in other countries. This comes as foreign regulators consider taking action against imports of electric cars made in China. According to Reuters, Chery Auto is in talks with the Italian government to start manufacturing there. If successful, Chery would be one of the first Chinese automakers to have a manufacturing presence in Europe. BYD, the world's largest electric vehicle maker, has been setting up car factories in various countries like Thailand, Brazil, Hungary, and Uzbekistan. In China, BYD can make up to 4 million cars every year. Its main markets outside of China in 2023 were Thailand, Brazil, Israel, and Australia. Will China prove to be a menace in the EV market? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and also hit the like and subscribe button to watch more such content.